This is one of a series of stories in connection with the Few Forgotten Women project. My name's Janet Few. I'm a family, social and community historian. I'm an author and an educator. And I've had a particular affinity with my great-great-grandmother Anne Stratford ever since I discovered that her childhood home was in the road I myself lived in for 3 years. Anne was the third of 5 children of Richard and Grace Stratford, née Kingham, and this is her story. Anne was baptised in May 1834 at St Michael and All Angels, Aston Clinton in Buckinghamshire, and it seems that she spent the first 21 years of her life living there. Aston Clinton's a village situated on the main road between the towns of Tring in Hertfordshire and Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire. Once married, Anne moved 6 miles away to Little Kimble, another Buckinghamshire village whose economy was dependent on agriculture. In company with many rural areas, Buckinghamshire was a flourishing centre for home industry, in particular lace making and straw plaiting. Many members of the Stratford family were involved in the plaiting and distribution of straw for the hat trade, which was centred on Luton in Bedfordshire. Born on the eve of the Victorian era in 1834 and dying a month before Edward VII in 1911, Anne Stratford's life story spans not just the Victorian age, but also the rise and demise of the domestic straw plait trade. At the time of Anne's birth, Buckinghamshire was still suffering from the aftermath of the Swing riots. In 1830, following an agricultural depression and a series of bad harvests, the plight of agricultural labourers led to protests, during which threshing machines across the south of the country were destroyed under the auspices of the mythical Captain Swing. Conditions and wages were poor, with workers increasingly being hired on short-term contracts and having to find their own accommodation, leaving them destitute when work was scarce. Prior to the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, poor relief was inadequate and the obligation of the church tithes was punitive. The riots spread across the south of England and were prevalent in Buckinghamshire and the surrounding counties. The Swing rioters targeted those they perceived as wealthy, and overseers of the poor were sent threatening letters, ostensibly from Captain Swing. The rioters demanded increased wages, better conditions, reductions in rents and tithe payments, as well as the destruction of threshing machines. Groups of rioters roamed the countryside, damaging the threshing machines, burning ricks and attacking property. As labourers in an agricultural community, even if they were not actively involved, the Stratfords must have been affected by the causes and consequences of these troubles. Before Anne's birth in 1829, her father Richard had twice been in court for petty theft. This might have been the results of the actions of a headstrong young man, but the stealing of firewood and turnips suggests perhaps that the family were in dire straits. As poverty tightened its grip, families such as the Stratfords were increasingly dependent on income from home industries, in their case straw plaiting. In 1839, Anne's short-lived younger brother was born. In the January of 1840, her 2.5-year-old sister Mary died of convulsions. Just a month later, Anne's mother Grace died of tuberculosis. This left Anne's father a straw dealer with 3 young children, Anne and 2 older brothers, to care for. Just over 3 months after the death of his first wife, Richard Stratford married again to 19-year-old Hannah Young. Anne was just 6 years old. The plait trade flourished in the years known as the Hungry Forties. The Stratfords' local market would have been 5 miles to the east in Tring. By 1846, a new market opened up to the west in Aylesbury, 4 miles away from Aston Clinton. The first Aylesbury market was held on the 3rd of October, and 20 children under the age of 12 from surrounding villages were given monetary prizes for their plait, and one of the winners was 11-year-old Anne Stratford. Anne was recorded as a plaiter in the 1851 census. She was living with her family in Green End Street, Aston Clinton, where I was to live in the 1980s. It was in 1851 that Anthony Nathan de Rothschild purchased the Aston Clinton estate from the Duke of Buckingham. The Rothschilds were to set up a model farm in the parish. According to Laszlo Groff's book, Children of Straw, 4% of the female population of Buckinghamshire in 1851 were involved in the plait trade. Yet in some parishes, such as Edlesborough, the figure was as high as 58%. Conditions were notoriously hard for straw platters, who would be brought weekly supplies of straw by the platman and paid by the score, 20 yards, for what they produced, the more complex patterns commanding the highest rates. From a very young age, children would be expected to contribute to the family income in this way, some in plait schools that gained a reputation for being places of child exploitation amid exceptional squalor and even cruelty. In 1851, Anne was one of 118 females aged between 5 and 25 in Aston Clinton, 59% of whom were involved in the plait trade. In all, 60% of Aston Clinton females, including children, were recorded with some form of occupation. 2/3 of them were platters. Anne Stratford's father, Richard, was a straw dealer, as was her older brother Peter. Another brother, Henry, was a straw drawer, preparing the straw for plaiting. The graph shows the age and gender distribution of the 239 plait workers in Aston Clinton in 1851, and they made up 41% of the workforce in the parish. Children as young as 3 would begin to learn to plait. Plaiting expert Veronica Main has found a record of a child of 18 months being involved. They would be crowded into plait schools held in small cottage rooms that had poor lighting and were full of fumes from the chaddy pot charcoal heaters that they put under their skirts for warmth. Those running the schools were accused of exploiting their labour force. School is a very misleading title. The education provided related solely to plaiting. Anne was illiterate, signing her marriage certificate and registering her daughter's birth with a cross. A child's early attempts at plait would not be saleable and were termed whittle-waddle, but by the age of 10 a child could earn 2/3 of an adult's income. The platters would work 12 to 14-hour days, but the rewards were significant. The most proficient who produced the more complicated patterns might earn more than their agricultural labouring husbands. Plain plait was worth 7pence a score. In 1813, Priest wrote, "Women and children here make great earnings by making lace and plaiting straw, unfortunately to the disadvantage of agriculture, for whilst they can earn from such work 7s. to 30s. a week, it can scarcely be expected that they would undertake work in the field." Lucy Luck referred to the straw season as being from January to June, saying there was less work during the remainder of the year, but there was a good living to be made from plaiting. There were several roles involved in the plait trade, including drawers, strippers, cutters, splitters, sorters, bleachers, dyers, and the platters themselves. One splitter could provide enough straw for 50 platters. Although it was possible to fulfil more than one of these roles, increasingly individuals specialised in one or the other. At the top of the hierarchy were the straw dealers, some having large-scale, highly profitable businesses. At the first Aylesbury Plait Market in 1846, Mr. Thorne of Aston Clinton brought 500 score of plait to sell, the most productive dealer bringing 1,300 score, and nearly £1,000 worth of plait changed hands. There were health hazards associated with plaiting. Platters developed cracks at the corners of their mouths from dampening the straw. If dyed straws were used, the dye transferred to the platters' mouths. The posture required also led to hunched left shoulders. Throughout the 19th century, middle-class men passed judgments on the lifestyle of the straw platters. Straw plaiting was regarded as leading to immorality and ignorance, with platters deemed to be more likely to have illegitimate children and lack proficiency in essential domestic tasks. The platters' husbands were accused of being lazy and living on their wives' incomes. In 1882, it was reported that platters are a sadly untidy and unthrifty set of people, scarcely knowing how to do a stitch of needlework or cook a potato, addicted to making a cup of tea and eating dry bread and butter if they can afford it. Nigel Goose wrote that the clergy visitation returns for Buckinghamshire in 1854 and 1866 blamed high levels of illegitimacy squarely on the plaiting industry. At Stukely and Linsdale, the evils of the trade were castigated, whilst at Aston Clinton, the local clergyman complained that the Platters became independent of their parents too soon, leading to early marriages and unspecified immorality, which it was claimed frequently took place on Buckland Common. Goose goes on to point out that in 1864 the Royal Commission on Children's Employment reported that children could earn sixpence a week from straw plaiting. Therefore there was a significant incentive for parents to put them to work. Thus it's not surprising that ignorance and vice abound among a population so reared. The Royal Commission on the Employment of Children, Young Persons and Women in Agriculture of 1867-8 commented on the great want of chastity amongst the Platt girls. Male and female platters go about the lanes together in summer engaged in work, which has not even the wholesome corrective of more or less physical exertion. Despite those contemporary claims, Gruff's study of Edlesborough in Buckinghamshire concluded that the assertions of higher illegitimacy rates amongst the Platt workers were unfounded. And Goosey's wider study of Hertfordshire suggests that, despite indications of enhanced rates of illegitimacy, this was not necessarily attributable to platting, other factors being at work. On the 13th of March 1855, Anne gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, Mary Ann Howe Stratford, in Aston Clinton. There's no DNA evidence to confirm or refute the identity of Mary Ann's father, but it seems almost certain that he was William Howe. Anne was to marry William 3 months later in his home village of Great Kimble, where the couple set up home. What then of the allegation of immorality amongst Platt workers? Anne's eldest brother had been born 3 months before her parents' marriage. Anne's own first child was also born out of wedlock. Would Anne or her mother Grace have been subject to the rough music that traditionally accompanied illegitimate births? This involved banging saucepan lids or tin cans together to cause a commotion outside the mother's home. At her baptism, which took place in Great Kimble after the marriage of William and Anne, Mary Ann's parents were listed as Robert and Charlotte Howe, who were in fact her grandparents. From this single instance, it's difficult to draw any conclusions about premarital pregnancy. However, in this respect, Anne was adding weight to those who reviled the straw-plaiting women as being promiscuous. Groff mentions an unreferenced parliamentary report of 1842, which stated that the moral condition of the lace-makers seems nearly as low as that of the platters. Chastity is at a sad discount and prostitution is at a high premium. Anne's husband William was an agricultural labourer. Despite the swing riots and increased demand for labourers following waves of emigration, agricultural wages were still low in Buckinghamshire in the 1850s. Perhaps attracted by the promise of up to £6 bounty in 1852 while still single, William Howe responded to a recruiting poster and enlisted in the Royal Bucks King's Own Regiment of Militia. The militia were amateur groups of soldiers mustered in times of strife or perceived threat. Over the following 2 years, William undertook several periods of service throughout the county, receiving regular bounty payments of up to £3.13 a quarter. It's likely that William and Anne spent 30 years in the right-hand half of this cottage in Great Kimble. In all, they had 6 daughters and 3 sons, all of whom survived to adulthood and married, which seems unusual in times of poverty and poor public health. Although no occupation is listed for Anne in the 7 censuses from 1871 to 1891, it's almost certain she would have continued to plait. Women's occupations are notoriously underrepresented in the census returns. Towards the end of their lives, William and Anne went back to live in Aston Clinton next to their son. William was working as a roadman by this time, and Anne had lost her hearing. But they did return to Great Kimble, and Anne was recorded as plaiting straw in the 1901 census. William died of exhaustion and acute bronchitis in 1904. Anne's generation was the last to depend on straw. The market had collapsed in the face of cheap imports, and former platters were forced to turn to sewing the foreign plait into bonnets, or to seek other means of contributing to the domestic economy. Of Anne's daughters, only the eldest, Mary Ann, took up plaiting, something she did into adulthood. In 1911, Anne died in the workhouse of old age and exhaustion. For more stories of forgotten women, please do visit the A Few Forgotten Women website. Thank you very much.